Welcome to Bankruptcy, Through the Looking Glass, with Barry Levine.
Hello and welcome to Through the Looking Glass with experienced bankruptcy attorney Barry Levine. I am your host, Kevin Rosenquist, and today's episode is Wage Garnishment 101, what you should know and how bankruptcy can help. Barry, good to see you. What are you saying now?
Don't work. You have no income. It's very easy.
Start. All right, so tell us what you see as far as some of the maybe common misconceptions or misunderstandings people have about wage garnishment and bankruptcy that you see them struggle with.
They almost sound like a broken record. I mean, the only thing that stops a wage garnishment, short of coming up with some sort of settlement with the creditor, which is highly unlikely if they've reached the point of looking to garnish one's wages, is a bankruptcy. I mean, again, the automatic stay stops the wage garnishment. You know, you can, if you're subject to a wage garnishment, you could check, my eyes glaze over when I look at that stuff, but, you could check a certain amount of your income is exempt from garnishment, and if you have 27 children, it limits the amount that could be garnished. But, the only thing that stops the wage garnishment is a bankruptcy. Nowadays, it's very unusual. You have to have almost a pissed off creditor, for some reason, because to me, it's a very unusual thing to occur. Because creditors nowadays, decades ago, when you can't see the picture of me with the hair up here, but oh yeah, that's me up at the end there. Collection attorneys were more aggressive. Creditors were more aggressive. It was a different world. Now to find a creditor going in for a wage garnishment, it's very unusual in my experience. But the only way you could stop it is by filing a bankruptcy. Anything else, you can agree to pay them if you're not necessarily a bankruptcy candidate. You really don't have a choice. And then you work out some sort of payment agreement. The unfortunate thing about, people in that situation is that, filing a bankruptcy in the scheme of things, if you can, is probably a cheaper option than defending litigation that you have no defense to. And usually a wage garnishment comes after the entry of a judgment. So the case has already been decided most of the time. It's that's what I really meant. It's a very unusual pre-judgment remedy. It's usually a post-judgment remedy. And at that point in time, I mean, the only thing you can really do is file a bankruptcy.
What types of debts can lead to wage garnishment if it gets to that point?
Any kind of debt. Anything at all. The IRS could levy a creditor who you owe money to gets a judgment, can go in and look to garnish your wages. I mean, anything. It's more a case of what creditors don't do that. And, a lot of them, if you're in default student loans, they just, write you down. I've yet to see them go look to garnish somebody's wages or something. Right,
yeah. Yeah.
It's mostly, credit card debt and things like that.
How does it get initiated? Is it something that how does it work?
Generally what happens, the process, first they usually have to file a complaint against you. And the complaint, I mean, granted, most of these cases, there's no defense to a credit card debt. You either use the credit card or you didn't use the credit card.
Yeah, that's true.
And
it wasn't my fault. I just fell out of my wallet into
the unfortunate thing is I don't have the money. While it may sound like a defense, it's more reality than anything else. And some judges may listen to it. Some judges don't care. But the thing is, they file a complaint. Eventually they get a judgment against you. And then as part of that, or they may file a suit on the judgment, they look to garnish your wages. And you'll get a notice of that. I mean, again, nothing happens in a vacuum. You'll get served with that garnishment, and then, you could appear in court and, make your spiel to the judge why you shouldn't be subject to the garnishment. Unlikely, but,
I was going to ask, does that ever work?
I have, something, I have no idea, because most of the time I file the bankruptcy and we send a notice of the filing and the garnishment ceases to be an issue. A few times we've had clients have their one check garnished and eventually it comes back to them.
You said that it's very rare, that it used to be more common and that things have changed a little bit. Why is that different now?
You know something? There used to be one collection attorney who worked at even this collection firm, I won't mention it, doesn't even do collections anymore. They do bank work, but they had a very aggressive collection firm who had a guy, he was going to send exocet missiles and he was going to bomb the creditors, don't ask. And they were more aggressive. It just doesn't, you have the several firms that do collection work, and they'll file a complaint. If you file an answer, the next thing you get is discovery. I may have mentioned that, the interrogatories. I mean, everything is, there's no personality in it. Not that there should be, but it's all very rote. You don't really ever feel, it is what it is. It just doesn't matter. The creditors seem to all take it in stride. They'd rather have you file a bankruptcy. It gets it off their desk.
Really?
Yeah. They sell it to somebody, and then your client gets a letter from somebody 3 years later that they're now the owner of the debt.
Oh, well, that's nice.
And I send them a nice letter basically telling them to have a nice day.
That's very, very nice of you to be cordial.
I had somebody say to me, I happen to use, as you probably know, I use Yiddish quite a bit. And somebody was looking for some documents in a case that I had, and I referred to the documents as dreck. You know what dreck means?
Nope.
Really? Dreck means like it sounds. Shit. But it's more in the sense of, you asked me for a lot of stuff. Here's the dreck you wanted. I mean, it's she didn't like it.
No, didn't like it.
Okay.
So
I used instead chazarai, which means pig shit.
Oh, okay, that's better. That's better. Are there any other ways to stop wage garnishment, or is bankruptcy the only one?
I said pretty much stop working. Yeah, no, that's really, the only other way to stop it would be to try to work something out with the creditor. I mean, after all, most creditors just want to be paid.
Right.
And very often the creditor who's actually suing is some bottom feeder who bought the debt for 10 cents on the dollar. And, maybe the wage garnishment puts dollar signs in their eyes, but the path of least resistance, if they get a check every month or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Very often the wage garnishment, if it goes through, doesn't result in a lot of money based on all the various exemptions that exist.
Sure, there's only a certain amount of percentage that you can reasonably take. Yeah. When
you have the process, the other way where it's the summary process where they haul you into court to see about your ability to repay. If the debt's $50,000, the judge orders me to pay $20 a month. What's the big deal? I'll pay that the rest of my life.
Sure. Right. Yeah.
Well, I had a guy, I just filed a bankruptcy for him. He, for 10 or 11 years, when he came into the office, it was very interesting because he had the receipts of every check that he sent to the creditors. And the debt was transferred to some new law firm. And it was the first time he realized after 11 years, he owed as much money now as he did when he started. Suffice it to say, he filed a bankruptcy.
I was going to say, I probably was a bankruptcy candidate right there for sure.
Well, I just wish he hadn't made those payments, but what can you do?
What can you do?
Again, people, there are diligent people out there, and he was very good. He had 5 or 6 creditors. He paid each of them like $10, $15 a month for 10, 11 years. People who pridefully say they paid off their creditors. And, if you have to, that's one thing. If you don't have to, they don't give you a gold star.
Yeah. Either way, it doesn't change that. Yeah.
American Express, you pay the bill off. Do they send you anything? Oh, you just paid $3,200 this month.
Thank you.
Not even a thank you.
Well, you've mentioned a few times about like working it out with your creditors, or trying to work it out with your creditors to work out a deal or whatever. How often does that work?
To me, it makes clients happy. I happen to think, again, I look at this all coming down to a business decision. Most of the times you're talking about money they don't have. So you're cutting a deal with money they don't have. How does that occur? I mean, it's impossible. Very often it's difficult for these people to come up with the fee to file a bankruptcy. So how can they, I mean, I probably mentioned once before, several times, I used to have a letter. Nobody wants to file a bankruptcy. When I was a young attorney, I used to have a nice letter. They'd rather pay you 10 cents on the dollar than pay me to file a Chapter 7. And the response would be, we'll take 60 cents on the dollar. And I would say, you don't seem to understand. They can file bankruptcy, you're going to get zilch. Oh, no, it's not frustrating. It is what it is.
Yeah.
I mean, I very often have clients, I liquidate their businesses. And, people who have small businesses, even big businesses, don't realize that American Express credit card that has their name on it with the company's name on it, they're personally liable.
Right.
Nothing happens for that card. And so we send notices that the company's gone out of business, but American Express keeps sending them notices. And it's like, until they realize that until you file bankruptcy, you're still going to get those notices. I don't know why they don't throw it in the garbage. To me, it's like, makes you unhappy. Who cares? They're not getting paid and life goes on.
44 plus years just makes you just go, hey, whatever, man, just whatever.
Well, in my business, the only emergency, and none of these emergencies happen overnight, would be the seizure of assets in a business bankruptcy situation or a foreclosure sale or, anything else. Each one of these things comes with notice. To get, creditors, they used to get it in Massachusetts, a bank attachment is called a trustee process. And creditors would go in, and decades ago, they used to get ex parte, which means you only find out about the attachment after your credit checks bounce. Who uses checks nowadays?
I know where my checkbook is, Barry.
What is a checkbook, right? And now judges found that is an improper process. Now they give trustee bank attachments with notice. What happens when the notice is given? If there's any money in the account, it goes south. What can I say? Makes me happy.
Can you challenge a wage garnishment in court?
See, generally the wage garnishment, if it was pre-judgment, the whole issue is the judgment. If you've let the matter go to judgment and the creditor is holding a, $2,500 judgment issued by, I don't know, pick Malden District Court, let's say, what's the dispute? The proper thing would be to go back in if the judgment was a default judgment, which 9 times out of 10 it is in these collection cases, and dispute it. But again, what dispute do you have on a credit card?
Yeah, not much you can dispute there.
Either you use the money or you made payments that they didn't credit, but 9 times out of 10, no payments have been made.
Right. Yeah. And I imagine you said wage garnishment is pretty rare these days. I'd imagine it's sort of a last ditch effort, right? For these creditors, there's probably multiple opportunities to get out of that before it gets to that point. Is that fair?
I think there are 2 types of people. There are people who look to settle these claims and people who ignore them. And I think, it's the ones who ignore them in a situation with an aggressive creditor. The aggressive creditor end of it, they're rarer nowadays than anything else. I don't find, but then I have bankruptcy now. He's a Chapter 7. He has to do with a business deal from 2007, maybe 2008. He schnooked these people. It's on the court record that he schnooked them. And as a result, their debt is non-dischargeable, but they keep their attachment on his house. I'm in the process of, I don't see that they have much of a standing to void the attachment. He's still entitled to his lien. And it's now almost 20 years later, they haven't collected a dime. Claim is over $1 million.
Wow.
And I look at it, it's like, make somebody happy. I mean, I don't know. Put it on a financial statement, account receivable. I don't get that sort of animosity.
Yeah.
To me, it all comes, especially when you're dealing with money. Everybody has a figure that they can live with. I mean, especially, you're not talking about a back injury or a neck injury or, somebody's, God forbid, a this or that. If you're talking about the normal course of things, credit card debt, business debt, I mean, it all comes to dollars and cents.
Yeah. No, you've said it several times. It's a business decision.
Well, I get back to that being an indentured servant. I mean, you have people out there, nobody quantifies anything. When you file a bankruptcy, it's the first time most people say, well, maybe what's my shit worth? What's this worth? What's that worth? And you sit there and you look at your income and expenses and, how do they live? I mean, they're in the shit of $3,000 a month, or $4,000 a month. I mean, how do you live?
Right.
And on the other hand, food is very expensive. Nothing is cheap.
Right. Everything's expensive right now. Yeah.
Very often it's the first time they're faced with the fact that, geez, how do we make ends meet? And I always, I happen to think that when people have to make a payment, they always find a way to make a necessary payment. But, if all you're doing is winding up putting $2,000 or $3,000 a month into your credit card debt and, you're having trouble putting food on the table, to me, it's a no-brainer. You want to put food on the table.
Right. Yeah.
The rest of them can survive.
Yeah. Prioritize. All right. Well, thanks for tuning in to Through the Looking Glass with Barry Levine. To connect with Barry, head to levineslaw.com. Please like and subscribe to our channel and leave us a review. Barry, it's always great having you here. Thanks so much.
Sei gesund, as we say.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.